Welcome everyone to this panel session, Better Together, How AWS is Helping Build a Stronger Open Source Community. My name is Madeline Olson. I am a member of AWS and the Redis core team, and joined with me is Matt Acey, a member of the AWS Open Source Outreach Program, and Carl Lurch, who is a member of the Rust community. So just kind of like to start us all off, would you two be willing to sort of, reintroduce yourself and tell everyone how you're involved in the open source community?
Sure. I'll start because I actually probably have the least interesting of the backgrounds. So Matt Acey and I run our AWS's open source strategy and marketing team, which is very light on marketing, even lighter on strategy, and mostly focused on helping AWS service teams or product teams figure out how to better engage with open source communities. And I am the only person on this call who doesn't have a productive job, in that I don't write any code. I'm not a developer. I've always felt a little bit self-conscious about the fact that I don't write code, but I may be an indicator of the other folks who contribute to open source in different ways, through marketing and other things, because every open source project needs people. At least this is what I like to tell myself, needs people like me that can't code but can maybe talk about why the code is meaningful.
Yeah. And I'm Carl, and yeah, I've been working with Rust for about 6 years-ish now. I've authored the Tokyo library. It's a asynchronous runtime for the Rust programming language. And I'm on the brand new Rust platform team at AWS. We started, I think we've had a number of other Rust ecosystem members join, like Nico Patsakis and Sean MacArthur and Esteban Felix. And we're here because our goal is to make sure Rust fulfills its promise. So Rust is a new programming language that focuses on safety, performance, and ease of use. We've been using it, like AWS has been using it more and more, and has decided to start this team. So we're working in the open source community entirely, but from a point of view of supporting Amazon as well. And before that, I've been involved with open source, I guess, most of my career now. Before that, it was a lot of Ruby, and I came from, I kind of started really getting into service building from the Ruby on Rails approach. And I contributed there, worked on Bundler back then. If you use Ruby, you may know it. So it's been a big part of my career, kind of like the main part.
Awesome.
Hey, Madeline, can I ask a question of you two? I know I'm not supposed to be the one asking questions, but the way Carl introduced himself, I know there's going to be a question that relates to this later, but Carl said that he's part of a team where they were hired basically just to contribute to Rust and Tokyo. And Madeline, I know your story. You, I think, decided that you wanted to contribute to Redis.
Yeah.
Maybe like thinking about that in terms of how AWS does things, maybe briefly tell your stories about and why is AWS encouraging you to contribute, or presumably you haven't been fired for contributing, and Carl was actually hired to do it.
Yeah.
I was hoping to dive into the next, kind of explain a little bit more in detail of what I do at AWS Elasticache. So I currently have as I mentioned, 2 roles. One is I am a member of the Redis core team, but also my day job is I work at Amazon Elasticache, which is the in-memory managed database service. So we manage Redis and Memcached. And so when I joined, we didn't have any real open source or meaningful open source contributions. All we did was basically take an open source product, make it a little bit easier to manage, and plop it out, as a managed offering. So we really just focused on making it easier. But as time progressed, it became kind of obvious that there was a bunch of stuff that we couldn't, we wanted to make the experience as good for our customers as possible. So that meant getting involved in the community to make sure that our customers were getting the best sort of experience. The main inflection point for me was TLS. So my focus in Elasticache has always been security. And a big ask for enterprise customers, people that care about compliance, was supporting encryption in transit, or TLS, within Redis, which isn't just something you can do just within Elasticache. I mean, we could, but we thought the right choice was really to get it out and build sort of a standard around that. And so that was sort of my big involvement. And so far, we've seen that as like a great collaboration, right? Since we don't have to maintain a big chunk of code internally, the open source community gets it. The open source community as a whole, becomes more secure since more people are using it. And the last major release of Redis 6, was actually a big security push. TLS was supported. We finally got role-based access control. So all in all, it was kind of like a really big win for the community. And as a result, that's also a win for our customers, since we provide Redis as a managed offering.
Yeah, it's interesting. I believe that the Rust platform team that just started is maybe the first kind of team within AWS that was really hired to work on an external project like that, to contribute to work on the greater ecosystem. And I mean, I'm still fairly new to Amazon, but what I've seen already is kind of like that Rust within Amazon kind of happened. It happened really, really fast, I would say. And Rust is still fairly new. So one thing that's been, one part of the experience is within Amazon, we're trying to build services like S3, S3 is using Rust now, and Firecracker, another open source VM is built using Rust. Part of the experience that we're feeling here is there's a bunch of stuff within the ecosystem that's really lacking for having a really streamlined experience building these services compared to maybe more mature platforms like Java, Go, and whatnot. So to really build these solid production grade services, there's a lot of still work that has to be done to around monitoring, logging, debugging, performance, profiling, those kinds of aspects. So instead of just building it and kind of as internal tools, there's an opportunity, and Amazon's taking that opportunity to build it with help from others, because it's not just Amazon, it's also Facebook and Google and Microsoft. All these teams are seeing rapid growth of Rust usage internally, and the same problems are being hit. So there's an investment across that ecosystem to collaborate and build the missing tools to help. Because if we build them for us, they're going to not only be useful for us, but also our customers. And that's something, as someone who's still new to Amazon, that's interesting. For me coming in, I was like, okay, I'm going to come in, I'm going to help Amazon build Rust services. But it turns out internally, the question is not, well, how can we make it better for Amazon? It's how can we make it better for our own customers? So it's let's talk with our customers instead. Let's put the focus again on our customers, which I thought was interesting. So there is this focus for us at Amazon to build Rust, but also let's build this tooling to enable everyone to build these faster and reliable services.
And I can say firsthand that we internally at Amazon Elasticache have started using Rust, and Carl has been helpful in that sense. Just he's helping us help our customers. So it definitely works well. I guess to dovetail on that, so I mean, the first question I was going to introduce is why is open source technology so important? And I think I already touched on sort of the main point that we had, which is that it's really, it helps our customers because people, are becoming very invested in, like, they build their whole technological stacks on top of open source products, and then they become invested in making sure they work. To Carl's point, like, people are building their stacks on Rust, so they now care that Rust is well maintained. It has all the debugging tools that it needs. It has all the infrastructure it needs. And the same can also be said of Redis. Redis is used rather extensively throughout Amazon as both a caching tool and an in-memory, just sort of ephemeral data storage device. There's a lot of AWS services that use it extensively, and also things like the Amazon retail website. Alexa uses it extensively because you really need that low latency, fast responsiveness. And a lot of the contributions we've made recently to Redis are directly because we have these, huge consumers of Redis saying, hey, this doesn't work the way we want. We're having downtime, something's not working. Can you guys help us fix it? And we, as the Amazon Elasticache team, are helping them make Redis more robust, which, helps the whole community.
Yeah. And Madeline, on that, I noticed that you called it out overtly, and Carl kind of talked about it implicitly. And that's that idea of, yeah, there are successful open source projects where it's basically one company and they release the code and people use it. But it feels like the better open source projects, and certainly something that I've seen with Redis over the last, at least over the last year, probably before then, but it's over the last year that I've really paid more attention to it. But we see it in Kubernetes, we see it in Carl called it out in Rust. And that is, as you bring those different customer experiences and their needs and kind of pull all that together into one project, both in terms of what the needs are, as well as the abilities to fix those needs and address those needs, you just end up with better software. Redis was great when it was just Salvatore's personal project. It's that much better when it's Redis Labs and Alibaba and AWS, or I should say individuals from those companies that are contributing. And same thing with Rust. We have some great folks like Carl, but Microsoft and Google and other companies also employ great Rust contributors. And it gets better through that composite experience.
And for me, there's also a whole other aspect of open source, and that matters a lot to me, is accessibility. Like, I'm building software, it seems like there's a lot to it. It's not easy. But open source, people are able to put out their ideas, their tools, things that they've built to make their own lives easier, and put it out so others don't have to repeat that over and over again, right? And so when someone else tries to use it and then they come up with another improvement, they're able to contribute back for everyone. And by doing this over and over again, whether it's these small contributions, they're just polishing off a little bit of the getting started, or simplifying bigger things like databases. How do you manage massively scalable databases and all that? It makes it putting it out in the open. It makes it building product software more approachable for everyone, right? It's now I remember way back in the day, what it was like trying to build a web app back, I don't know, whenever I started, early 2000s, probably late 99 or something. But it was hard. Now, things like Rails, or now building services, with Rust or Tokyo, the amount of combination of performance and safety with the ease of use, what you can get done now is is incredible, I think. And part of it is just people iterating in the open. It's tons of ideas, it's tons of different perspectives, it's tons of different use cases put in, and that brings something, I think, that is can't really be replicated, I guess, without open source.
Yeah, I don't think I really have much to add to that. That's kind of the thing that struck me was Redis was built as a way to solve Web 2.0 issues, which is that low latency access to data. And so Salvatore was just hey, I have this idea, we'll put it out in open source. And then it really gained just so much traction because people are like, hey, I also have that exact same problem and I will just use it. And the Redis core group has been kind of just slowly backtracking through, years of, commits, being like, I have this semi-related problem. Can we also fix this? And someone's like, oh, here's a pull request to fix this. And it's one other interesting thing about Redis is that Redis is a very highly forked project. So what a lot of people do is they take Redis, they fork it, they don't contribute back, but they add their little piece to it. And they still keep it out in the open. They're just like, maybe it doesn't get back into the open, the main repository, but it's still out in the open if someone wants to use it. There's an interesting database called Keydb, which is, it's like mostly compatible with Redis, but has a very different take on the threading model. So it can achieve like a slightly higher performance. And, it's just out in the open. It's also open source. And people can choose which one they think is kind of right for their application.
Yeah. I also have the Tokyo Learning tools. I wrote mini Redis. I would not recommend using in production. It's an alternate.
Mini Redis was great. It helped me learn stuff, I will say.
Since we're talking about alternatives, yeah. Since we're talking about alternatives,
don't use that one. Well, sort of on that topic. So the Redis like governance model is about, there's three major companies involved. There's Redis Labs, AWS, and Alibaba. So Redis Labs has 3 members, Alibaba has 1, and AWS has 1. So far, I think this has worked pretty well as like it is an extension to what we had before. It was just a one benevolent dictator for life. Have you seen that work as like a good example in open source models, or what other sort of governance models have you seen work well?
Yeah, I've over the various projects I've interacted with, there's definitely been a wide range of governance models. Like I think like Rails, one of the first ones I really got heavily involved with, like DHH was like at the helm, right? And there were like many contributors heavily involved, but at the end of the day, DHH was the leader. And it works out great. Like that strategy works out great for projects that have a long kind of dedicated leader who's willing to stay involved, right? But at some point, projects have to evolve past that. And I looked into the Redis governance model. It's I think that's a next step. On the other side of things, like Rust has a much bigger governance model that I think works really well for the Rust project, because the scope of that project is much bigger. Like there's the compiler, there's the language, there's tooling, there's the package manager, there's the ecosystem, and they've set up like a very kind of team-based approach where there's teams put together for every single kind of these verticals, and they have a strategy by which, like if there's a kind of a problem to be solved, they'll spin up a working group. So it's a lot, I guess, heavier in that regards, but for like the requirements are different. So it depends. I think a lot of it depends on the ecosystem, right? Like the community, how is the community involved with it as well? Like there's no one size fits all. So it'll be interesting to see how Redis kind of evolves and grows into this new governance model. And my guess is over time, it's probably going to evolve, learn, probably come up with new strategies as Redis grows.
And I also had a little bit selfishly, one of our main goals right now is to actually grow the core group, because right now it's only 5 people, and we've sort of noticed that's not really enough. Yeah. But there's really no one else that has a long history of commitment in the project. So it's good knowledge to take forward to sort of think about as we hope to keep growing.
Have you already kind of put up, how do you advertise that? How do you get more people joining the core team?
We don't know. We're
figuring it out. Yeah.
We're figuring it out as we go. We did have we had a talk at reInvent, sort of advertising it. We have sort of just organically added a couple of people. There's been a lot of organic growth within like the 3 major companies contributing. A couple more people from Redis Labs are sort of ramped up. A couple more people from AWS have ramped up. I think there's a couple more people from Alibaba ramped up, and there's also just a lot of other like big industry contributors who are just like, there's like someone working on Redis, and they are there's a lot of companies which are like, we have this Redis person, and then all they do is Redis. So they have become slightly more involved in saying like, hey, our company as a whole needs this.
Yeah.
So that's our strategy so far. I don't know if it's gonna work or not, but we'll see.
I mean, it's there. You can evolve over time, see what works, experiment, try. There's no one size fits all, and there's something that might be a right answer now, may not be in a year, right? So please keep an eye on that. Like I think like Tokyo on my end, Tokyo has been like, we have a core team, but it's also hard to kind of, when you go from the dictator, like benevolent dictator for life, to a core team, that transition, it's important to kind of like figure out like, what if the dictator for life stays involved, like there's still a persona, right? How much they still hold a lot of influence, and figuring out ways by which you can empower the community to like make decisions is definitely something that needs to be explored and experimented with, and that's something we're trying to figure out on the Tokyo side of things too.
Yeah, ultimately, both of you were talking about, I mean, you weren't saying the word, but it's what it sounds like to me, talking about how to build trust and to develop trust. And Madeline, you're saying you got the 5 right now, but what you're looking for is people that you trust to do good work and to maintain the code. And Carl, that's what you were saying, as you shift from the benevolent dictator to a broader model. I think that's, I mean, we're looking at that right now with the Elasticsearch fork that AWS has taken on, like trying to figure out what's the right way to govern it. And ultimately, it kind of doesn't matter which model you take, so long as you're able to build and maintain and create additional trust. I mean, that's what the governance, that's what those conversations are really ultimately all about. And what open source, what ultimately powers open source is that trust.
Yeah, I was gonna make that point, which I think, yeah, open source is sort of just built on that trust. Like everything's, works because of that. Well, we can kind of segue a little bit into the next topic. And we've talked about this a lot, but sort of like, how does AWS approach its commitment to open source in general? I know you mentioned, Carl, that you kind of just, spend all of your time on it. And this might be a little bit more targeted at Matt, but at least within Amazon Elasticache, we see as making sure the res, remains a strong and vibrant community is important to us and to, Amazon as a whole. And so we're steadily investing more and more into that, not just into the core project, but also into things like client development and other sort of toolings to make sure that people can continue to use Redis. So what are your guys' thoughts on that?
Yeah, maybe I'll take it first. It used to infuriate me before I joined AWS and I didn't necessarily understand why AWS did this or that with regard to open source. And somebody inside the company reached out to me once and said, Matt, you realize that you're looking for a kind of meta, what does AWS think about open source, to your question that you just asked, Madeline. And he said, but really it's, what do these individual service teams, these product teams think about open source? Because as both of you know, customer obsession is number one leadership principle, and but how that's articulated depends team by team. And so we've already heard for this Rust team that Carl's a part of, it's let's go out and hire a team of the best people that we possibly can. Madeline, with Elasticache, it was, you kind of had to, as I understand the story, you took the initiative and then worked with your manager to kind of figure out what was possible. And I see that in my role within AWS, I see that all sorts of different permutations about how those different teams express that customer obsession. And I think so, but so if I were to answer that question, what does AWS think about open source, and how do we honor that commitment to open source? Ultimately, we define it as how are we best going to obsess over customers. And as I think we see increasingly, as service teams realize that, oh, I could fork this open source project because maybe that allows me to deliver faster updates or security or performance to my customer. And that's customer obsession. And that's true. That's short-term customer obsession. More of our teams are seeing it through the lens of, oh, if I do that, then longer term, it becomes, I take on more technical debt. It becomes harder to upgrade those customers when they want the latest and greatest database or whatever. And so what I'm seeing from my position is more teams seeing open source as a way to deliver longer term, let's say medium to long term customer value, customer obsession. It's a better way to deliver results and all the different Amazon leadership principles. Have we been perfect historically? No, we absolutely haven't. Are we getting better? I think so. Like, because in the fact that you two are sitting on this call is, I think, a good indication that we're doing some things really well, and it makes me feel positive for the future that we'll continue to do better. Again, it's always wrapped around that idea of how do we best take care of customers. And I mean, we not only have services that are overtly built on open source, like Elasticache or Keyspaces is Apache Cassandra, and we have a range of others, but pretty much every AWS service depends on open source in some way, whether it's built with Rust, whether it's running somewhere on Linux, or everything in some way depends on open source. So it's in our interest to nurture those communities upon which we depend. And I think we're doing a better and better job.
Cool. Do you have anything to add to that, Carl?
Matt did a great job. Yeah, I hope to see more teams like the Rust platform team as Amazon grows into it. I mean, Amazon's been evolving right over time and responding and listening to what customers want. So yeah, we'll see where that goes.
Awesome. So I think a good closing comment to sort of wrap us up with is, like, how do we see, AWS moving into the future with how it contributes to open source? And I can speak a little bit with Elasticache, and we're really hoping to, contribute more to the community as a whole. So far, all we've seen is, the more we contribute, the more we get back. And the more expertise we build in the community, the more trust we build. So it just seems to be, better for everyone. And I think hopefully that's sort of what was echoed in what Matt just said, and that's, the more we invest, the more we get back. So just be great to hear your guys' thoughts on that.
Well, I'll take next. I think based on what we've seen over the last few years, I don't want to make empty promises about the future, but based on what we have seen over the last, say, 2 years, I think it would be reasonable to assume that trend is going to continue, and that we'll both be releasing more projects of our own, things like Firecracker or Bottle Rocket, but that we'll also be increasingly good citizens of the communities upon which we depend. And again, I think Redis is a great example of that, but also Rust and a number of others. And in some cases, if we feel like our customers are getting locked out, then, like with Elasticsearch, we'll take a stand and more actively contribute. But my hope is that if we are both good code citizens contributing to the code, but also good citizens and working with these different open source partners, and that's a big part of my job, is working with the MongoDBs and the Redis labs, et cetera, of the world, then I think I'm really hopeful that we will be a force multiplier for good in open source.
Yeah, we're gonna, on the Rust side, we're like, see, Rust growing both at Amazon and with our customers, and anything that we build, anything we build out in the open is usable by all, by us, by all. And well, we hope, I think our team, one of the tenets that we have is to work out in the open. So we're gonna keep that, like we're working, we put out, like Nico put out a blog post talking about the team and how we're going to be working on it, and we're just getting started, right? So let's get off the ground, but we'll be working out in the open and keeping engaging customers out in the open source ecosystem.
Well, I think that seems like a good wrap up. Thank you too for, we were able to have this nice little chat. I know Matt is, if you want to plug yourself on Twitter, I know you're very active. I also tweet, but I don't tweet very often.
Because you do productive things like write code.
Yeah, I write code all day.
Tweets are my code.
Okay, I gotta build your brain.
Thanks.
It's my C++. Oh wait, that's not cool. I shouldn't say that.
No, it's Rust. That's exactly like Carl's here. You can't say C++.
I've already failed this call. I just had to go a few more seconds and not say something stupid, and I failed.
Okay. Edit it out in post. All right. Well, thanks. Thanks. This was fun.
Yeah.
Thanks all.